The air tasted of metal and ash. Kalen pulled his respirator tighter against his face as he navigated through the skeletal remains of what had once been Omnicorp's mining facility Sector 7. 15 years since the industrial catastrophe that had rendered Xylos uninhabitable to all but the most desperate, and still the moon's atmosphere carried the chemical signatures of corporate greed. Kalen's boots crunched over debris as he scanned the horizon with practiced eyes. The jagged silhouettes of collapsed structures stretched before him like the ribcage of some massive, decaying beast. His detection equipment hummed softly, calibrated to locate anything of value amid the wasteland: metals, functioning tech components, medical supplies. Survival was a daily calculation on Xylos. Resources spent versus resources gained. Risk versus reward. Emotional attachments were a luxury Kalen had abandoned long ago, alongside his Omnicorp engineering credentials and whatever idealistic notions he'd once harbored about corporate accountability. The scar that ran from his left temple to jawline pulled tight as he grimaced. The memories still came unbidden sometimes. The evacuation alarms, the sealed doors, the faces of those left behind when Omnicorp decided cutting losses was more profitable than saving lives. He tried to expose what happened, tried to hold someone accountable. His reward had been a falsified security record, a swift termination, and unofficial exile to this toxic rock. His detector pinged, pulling him from the past. Something unusual, about 500 meters northeast. Probably nothing, a pocket of rare minerals or a piece of equipment protected enough to have survived the caustic environment. Still, it might be worth checking. The sky darkened as Kalen picked his way through the ruins. Chemical clouds gathered, threatening one of Xylos's infamous acid rains. He needed to find shelter soon, but curiosity pushed him forward. The detector's signal grew stronger, more insistent. He paused at the edge of a massive crater, likely the epicenter of one of the secondary explosions. At the bottom, partially buried under sheets of twisted metal, was something that didn't belong among the industrial wreckage. The shape was too regular, too intentional. A container of some kind, its surface gleaming with an unusual iridescence despite the corrosive atmosphere that had dulled everything else to rust and ruin. Kalen's instincts screamed caution, but survival on Xylos meant taking calculated risks. He began his descent, careful to test each foothold. As he drew closer, the container's nature became clear. It was a cage, or perhaps a transport pod, constructed of materials he couldn't readily identify. Technology far beyond standard Omnicorp equipment. The pod was damaged, its locking mechanism partially melted, but remained surprisingly intact given the surrounding devastation. A small control panel on its side still emitted a faint, pulsing light. Kalen approached with the wariness of someone who had learned that anything valuable on Xylos came with a price. He brushed away layers of toxic dust from the pod's viewing panel and activated his helmet light. What he saw inside froze him to his core. A girl. No, not quite human. Her proportions were similar, but her skin bore subtle geometric patterns that seemed to shift beneath the surface. Her ears tapered to slight points, and what looked like fine, crystalline filaments were interwoven with strands of silvery hair. She was curled into herself, completely naked, her body marked with what appeared to be chemical burns and methodical surgical scars. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, were the deep violet of Xylos's night sky, but held none of its beauty, only emptiness, save for the dried tracks of tears on her gaunt cheeks. Kalen stepped back, a sudden nausea washing over him that had nothing to do with the toxic air. He knew what he was seeing. This wasn't random salvage. This was containment. This was experimentation. This was everything he'd tried to expose about Omnicorp before they'd silenced him. His first instinct was to leave. Whatever this was, it spelled danger. People who interfered with Omnicorp's proprietary assets didn't simply disappear. They became examples. But as he turned to go, the girl's eyes flickered, focusing briefly on his face. Something stirred in that empty gaze, recognition not of him, but of what he represented. Another being, possibly an end to isolation. The rational part of Kalen's mind cataloged the reasons to walk away. Limited resources, increased risk of detection, the likelihood that she was dying anyway. But another part of him, a part he thought had died alongside his colleagues years ago, recognized in her the same betrayal he'd experienced, the same brutal calculation of human value against corporate profit. Cursing under his breath, Kalen examined the locking mechanism. It was sophisticated but damaged. With some careful manipulation and the tools in his salvage kit, he could probably override it. The first drops of acid rain hissed against the metal around him as he worked, eating away at his protective gear. Time was running out. Finally, the lock gave way with a pneumatic hiss. The containment pod opened, releasing the antiseptic smell of a laboratory into Xylos's toxic air. The alien girl didn't move, didn't react to her sudden exposure. Kalen shrugged off his outer jacket, the only barrier between his inner clothing and the caustic atmosphere, and carefully draped it over her naked form. Her skin was unnaturally cool to the touch, and she flinched almost imperceptibly at the contact. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't know if she could understand him or even hear him, but it felt necessary to break the silence somehow. With as much gentleness as his calloused hands could manage, Kalen gathered the frail figure into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, even accounting for possible physiological differences. Her body tensed initially, then went limp, surrendering to whatever new fate awaited her. As Kalen began the laborious climb out of the crater, the alien girl cradled against his chest. The acid rain intensified. Each drop that found his now exposed skin burned, but he hunched protectively over his charge and pressed forward. His shelter was nearly an hour's trek away, and the detector at his belt had begun emitting a warning signal. Something large was moving in the vicinity, probably one of the automated Omnicorp drones that still patrol the ruins. Kalen's steps grew heavier as he navigated the treacherous landscape. His breathing labored through the increasingly saturated filter of his respirator. The weight in his arms seemed both insignificant and immense, a physical burden that paled in comparison to the implications of what he'd just done. For the first time in years, he'd made a decision not calculated for survival alone. As he trudged through the caustic rain toward his makeshift home, Kalen couldn't decide if this marked a return to humanity or merely a new form of madness. The shelter Kalen called home was the reinforced remnants of an old maintenance outpost, half buried in the hillside to protect it from Xylos's frequent chemical storms. He'd spent months making it habitable, sealing cracks, rigging a rudimentary air filtration system from salvage parts, creating layers of decontamination between the outer door and the main living space. The alien girl hadn't stirred during the journey. Only the shallow rise and fall of her chest beneath his tattered jacket assured Kalen she still lived. He carried her through his meticulous decontamination process, washing away the worst of the toxic residue before bringing her into the relative safety of the inner chamber. The space was Spartan but functional. A cot, a workbench covered with salvage and repair projects, storage containers stacked against walls, and the precious filtration system humming in the corner. It was meant for one person's survival, not rehabilitation. Kalen gently laid the girl on his cot and rummaged through his limited medical supplies. What he had were basics: antiseptics, skin patches, painkillers, bandages, gathered over years of careful scavenging. Nothing specialized for whatever her physiology might require. "I don't know if any of this will help you," he said, more to fill the silence than with any expectation of response. "But I'll do what I can." The girl's eyes followed his movements, though her expression remained blank. When Kalen approached with a dampened cloth to clean her wounds, she shrank back slightly, her body tensing. "I won't hurt you," he said, forcing his gruff voice to soften. "I just need to see how bad it is." He worked methodically, cleaning each visible wound, applying antiseptic to the chemical burns, and covering the worst areas with skin. The precision of the surgical scars disturbed him most. Clean, intentional marks and patterns that suggested methodical exploration rather than medical treatment. Throughout the process, The girl remained silent, occasionally trembling but offering no resistance. When Kalen finished, he found a relatively clean shirt and pants among his meager possessions and set them beside her. "For when you're ready," he explained, then moved to the far side of the shelter to give her space. At the workbench, he busied himself repairing his acid-damaged gear, casting occasional glances toward his unexpected guest. She hadn't touched the clothes or the water he'd left within reach. She simply stared at the low ceiling, curled on her side, his jacket still clutched around her thin shoulders. As the hours passed, Kalen spoke sometimes, about nothing consequential. The weather patterns, how the filtration system worked, which areas of the ruins were safest to traverse. His voice filled the small space, rusty from years of silence, but gradually finding its rhythm again. He didn't expect answers, but talking seemed better than allowing the silence to emphasize their isolation. "You're safe here," he told her before settling on his makeshift bed of storage containers for the night. "Whatever they did to you, whatever they wanted from you, that's over now." He wasn't sure if that was true, but he wanted it to be, for both their sakes. Morning on Xylos was a relative term, just a slight lightening of the perpetually murky sky. Kalen woke to find the water container empty, though the food remained untouched. The girl had moved during the night, positioning herself in the corner farthest from where he slept, still wrapped in his jacket rather than the clothes he'd offered. Progress, however minimal. Kalen nodded to himself and set about his morning routine, preparing for a necessary salvage run. Their supplies wouldn't last with two people, and he needed components to expand the filtration system's capacity. "I have to go out," he explained as he checked his equipment. "Not far and not for long. There's more food and water here." He indicated the supplies he'd left accessible. "I'll be back before dark." The girl's eyes tracked his movements, but she gave no indication of comprehension. Kalen hesitated at the door, suddenly reluctant to leave her alone. What if she tried to go outside, not understanding the toxicity? What if her condition worsened while he was gone? But necessity overruled concern. He secured the shelter and headed out into the poisonous day. The salvage run was productive but rushed. Kalen worked with half his attention on his surroundings and half on the mental clock, ticking down the hours until he could return to the shelter. He found usable filtration components and, unexpectedly, an intact medical diagnostic scanner, a rare prize that might help him better understand his guest's physiology and injuries. He was packing the last of his finds when the scanner on his belt picked up movement, large, mechanical, and approaching rapidly. Ducking behind a collapsed wall, Kalen watched as an Omnicorp drone moved through the area, its sensors sweeping methodically across the landscape. This wasn't one of the routine patrol units that mindlessly followed decades-old security protocols. This was newer, more sophisticated. Its search pattern was deliberate, targeted. Kalen remained motionless until the drone passed, then took a circuitous route back to the shelter, careful to avoid open areas and to disrupt his trail where possible. The drone's presence confirmed his fears. Someone was actively looking for something, or someone, on Xylos. Upon returning to the shelter, Kalen found the girl exactly where he'd left her, though she'd consumed more water. Her eyes widened slightly at his entrance, then returned to their guarded emptiness. "Something's happening out there," he told her as he unloaded his salvage. Those weren't standard patrols. Someone's searching. He didn't expect a reaction and received none, but as he turned to place the medical scanner on his workbench, a soft sound broke the silence. It was barely audible above the hum of the filtration system, a single syllable whispered in a voice cracked from disuse. Kalen froze, then slowly turned back toward the girl. She was watching him intently now, her eyes more focused than he'd yet seen them. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. She swallowed visibly, her throat working with effort. Then, with deliberate care, she repeated the sound. Not a word he recognized, but clearly meaningful. Something personal, perhaps her name or a word from her language. "Is that your name?" Kalen asked. After a moment's hesitation, she gave a small, jerky nod. It was the first clear communication, the first acknowledgement that she understood him at all. "Can you say it again?" More slowly, he encouraged. Elara, she managed, the syllables distinct this time. Her voice was unexpectedly melodic despite its roughness. Elara, Kalen repeated, and was rewarded with another slight nod. It was a small thing, a name, a few syllables, but it pierced the fortress of silence she'd built around herself. In that moment, Kalen realized that what he'd rescued from the containment pod wasn't merely a body, but a person who, despite everything, still clung to an identity. The sound of his name on Alara's lips came 3 days later, after Kalen had witnessed her gradual, halting recovery. She ate small amounts now, accepted clean clothing, and occasionally watched him work at his bench with something approaching curiosity in her violet eyes. Her wounds were healing with surprising speed, revealing more of the intricate patterns that seemed etched beneath her skin, geometric forms that sometimes shifted in color from silver to pale blue when she experienced strong emotions. Kalen was showing her how to operate the water purifier when she suddenly pointed at him and said with careful precision, "Kalen." He looked up, startled not just by the sound of his name, but by the initiative behind it. "Yes," he confirmed. "That's right." Elara nodded, then pointed to herself. "Elara." Then, with visible effort, she extended her vocabulary. "Safe. Here." She was repeating his own words back to him, Kalen realized. She'd been listening all along, processing, learning. "Yes," he agreed. "You're safe here." Her expression didn't change much. The trauma was still too raw, the wariness too ingrained, but something in her posture eased slightly. From that day forward, their communication expanded incrementally. Single words became short phrases. Gestures became more expressive. Elara began to move around the shelter more freely, examining objects with cautious curiosity. Kalen taught her the essential knowledge for survival on Xylos, how to check for air quality, which warning lights on the equipment required immediate attention, where the emergency supplies were kept. She absorbed everything with remarkable quickness, her intelligence evident despite her limited communication. One evening, as they shared a meal of reconstituted protein, Elara suddenly stiffened. Her head tilted, as if listening to a sound beyond Kalen's perception. The patterns on her skin flashed from silver to a deep, warning blue. "What is it?" he asked, instantly alert. Elara pointed toward the outer door, her expression tense. "Machine," she managed. "Outside." Kalen moved quickly to the monitoring system he'd rigged near the entrance. Sure enough, something was moving in the vicinity, something that hadn't triggered his perimeter alarms. He adjusted the settings, and the screen revealed a sleek, black drone unlike the ones he'd encountered before. This one hovered silently, its sensors systematically scanning the hillside where the shelter was concealed. "How did you know?" he whispered, turning back to Elara. She tapped her ear, then her chest. "Feel it," she explained haltingly. "Machine. Energy." Kalen watched the drone's methodical search with growing unease. Its technology was far beyond the automated units left behind after the evacuation. This was new, purpose-built, and specifically deployed to Xylos. The implications were clear. OmniCorp hadn't abandoned their asset, after all. "We need to stay absolutely quiet," he instructed Elara. "No movement, no sound until it's gone." They waited in tense silence as the drone completed its sweep of the area. Just as Kalen began to hope it would move on, it paused directly above the most concealed portion of the shelter. Its sensors pulsed with increased intensity. Beside him, Elara's breathing quickened. The patterns on her skin flashed rapidly between blue and a threatening crimson. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Stay calm," Kalen whispered. "It might not be able to detect us through the shielding." But the drone descended lower, its scanning beams focusing on the shelter's hidden entrance. It had found them, or at least found something suspicious enough to warrant closer investigation. Kalen's mind raced through options, none of them good. The shelter had no weapons beyond his salvage tools. Attempting to flee would expose them to the toxic atmosphere and a chase they couldn't win. As the drone positioned itself to breach the entrance, Elara suddenly stepped forward. Her eyes fixed on a monitor, and her body trembled with visible effort. She raised one hand toward the image of the drone, fingers splayed. Alero, Kalen began, but fell silent as the air around them seemed to thicken with static electricity. The patterns across Alera's skin glowed with increasing brightness, pulsing in complex sequences as beads of sweat formed on her forehead. On the monitor, the drone faltered, its smooth hover becoming erratic. Its sensors flashed chaotically before shutting down completely. The machine dropped from the air like a stone, crashing into the toxic soil outside. Alera collapsed to her knees, gasping. The glow of her skin patterns faded, leaving her pale and shaking. Kalen rushed to her side, supporting her before she could fall completely. "How did you do that?" he asked, mixing with concern as he helped her to the cot. Alera's breathing was labored, her eyes unfocused with exhaustion. "My people, energy," she managed before lapsing in her native language. The melodic sounds incomprehensible to Kalen, but clearly conveying distress. "Rest now," he told her, tucking his jacket around her trembling form. "You're safe. You saved us." As Alera drifted into an exhausted sleep, Kalen reviewed the monitor's recording of what had happened. The drone's malfunction hadn't been random. Alera had somehow disrupted its systems remotely, using some form of energy manipulation he couldn't begin to understand. The realization was both wondrous and terrifying. If this ability was what Omnicorp had been experimenting with, trying to harness or weaponize, no wonder they were so determined to reclaim her. And no wonder Alera had been so thoroughly traumatized by her captivity. Kalen spent the night at his workbench, modifying their detection equipment, reinforcing the shelter's shielding, and considering their increasingly limited options. The drone's appearance confirmed they were being actively hunted. The shelter wouldn't remain secure for long against a determined search. When Alera woke the following morning, she was weak but lucid. She sat up slowly, accepting the water Kalen offered. "Feel empty," she said, touching her chest to indicate the depletion she felt after using her abilities. "You need to rest and recover," Kalen told her. "But we also need to talk about what happened, about what you can do." Alera nodded solemnly. Over the next hours, through a halting combination of simple English words, gestures, and occasional drawings, she conveyed fragments of her story. Her world, she couldn't provide its name in a way Kalen could pronounce, had been beautiful, peaceful, with towering crystal formations and multiple moons. Her people possessed natural abilities to manipulate certain energy fields, talents used primarily for healing, communication, and harmonizing with their environment. When Omnicorp vessels first arrived, they presented themselves as peaceful explorers seeking knowledge exchange. The reality was resource exploitation and biological research. When Alera's people resisted further incursions, the response was swift and devastating. Many were killed. Some, like Alera, were captured for study. She explained, her hands mimicking removal from her body. "Blood, tissue, try to find, source of ability." Her voice broke as she added, "Many die, in cages, next to me." Kalen felt sick as she described the systematic experimentation, the attempts to amplify and weaponize her natural capabilities. She had been reduced to a research subject, her abilities pushed beyond their limits, her body and mind treated as resources to be extracted. "The containment pod I found you in," Kalen said carefully. "Was it being transported somewhere?" Alera nodded. "New facility. Bigger tests." Her expression darkened. "Accident happened. Transport crashed." She gestured around them. "Here, on Bad Moon." The transport must have been caught in the industrial disaster that had rendered Xylos uninhabitable, Kalen realized. The containment pod's advanced materials had protected Alera from the worst of the catastrophe, becoming both her prison and her life support for years until he'd found her. "How many others like you were brought here?" he asked. Alera's eyes filled with tears for the first time since her rescue. "All gone," she whispered. "I feel no others." The knowledge that she might be the last of her kind in this system hung heavily between them. Kalen reached out cautiously, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Alera placed her smaller one in his, a gesture of trust that affected him more deeply than he'd expected. "The drone yesterday wasn't random," he told her. "They're looking for you specifically. This shelter won't hide us for much longer." "Where can go?" Alara asked, fear evident in her voice despite her limited vocabulary. Kalen had been considering this question all night. There was really only one possible answer. "There's a place, a forgotten outpost on the far side of the Deadlands. It was established before the disaster as a monitoring station, then abandoned during the evacuation. Some people who didn't trust Omnicorp used it as a rally point." "Other people there?" Hope colored Alara's question. "I don't know," Kalen admitted. "I've never been there myself. I only know about it from encrypted communications I intercepted years ago. But it's our best chance. If anyone's still surviving on Xylos in an organized way, that's where they'd be. The journey would be dangerous, crossing the most contaminated regions of Xylos, avoiding both natural hazards and the increasing Omnicorp presence, but remaining meant eventual discovery." "When?" Alara asked simply. "Tomorrow," Kalen decided. "We'll gather everything useful we can carry, plot the safest route possible, and leave at first light." That night, as they prepared for the journey, Kalen revealed more of his own past than he had in years. He told Alara about his role as an environmental systems engineer for Omnicorp, his growing concerns about the company's disregard for safety protocols, and his failed attempt to prevent the disaster that had claimed thousands of lives. "I try to warn people, try to get the evidence out," he explained as he packed medical supplies. "But Omnicorp buried it all, made me the scapegoat instead. By the time the evacuation was complete, I was a pariah with nowhere to go. So I stayed, survived on what others abandoned." Alara listened intently, her expression solemn. When he finished, she said simply, "Same." "Both betrayed." "Yes," Kalen agreed, struck by the parallel she'd drawn. "I guess we were." As the shelter's lights dimmed for their final night there, Alara spoke again, her voice stronger than before. "Tomorrow," she said with quiet determination, "we find new place. Together." Dawn brought acid fog rolling across the landscape, providing cover but adding another layer of danger to their journey. Kalen and Alara emerged from the shelter wearing every protective layer they could manage. Kalen in his salvaged environmental suit, Alara in modified clothing with extra filtration for her more sensitive respiratory system. The pack Kalen carried held their essential supplies: water, food, medical equipment, tools. Alara carried a smaller pack with monitoring devices she'd learned to operate. Both wore masks that would filter the worst of the toxic air for about 12 hours before requiring replacement filters. "Stay close," Kalen instructed as they set out. "Follow exactly where I step. If something happens to me, here's the map to the outpost." He pressed a small data pad into her hand, showing the route he'd plotted through the Deadlands. Alara nodded, her violet eyes resolute above her mask. She returned the pad to him after studying it briefly. "I remember," she assured him, tapping her temple. Their progress was slow but steady through the morning hours. Kalen led them along ridgelines where possible, avoiding the lower areas where chemical pooling was most severe. The fog provided concealment from aerial surveillance, but also hid potential hazards until they were nearly upon them. By midday, they'd reached the edge of what had once been Omnicorp's main processing facility, now a vast, cratered wasteland where the most devastating explosion had occurred. The ruins stretched for kilometers in every direction, a maze of twisted metal, collapsed structures, and poisonous sinkholes. "We need to cross through there," Alara asked, her voice muffled by her mask. "Around would take too long," Kalen confirmed. "But I've identified a path that should be relatively stable. We'll need to be extremely careful." As they picked their way into the devastation, the fog began to thin, burned away by the caustic chemicals that still leaked from ruptured underground storage tanks. The air shimmered with toxic haze, and their suits' external sensors registered increasing contamination levels. They had navigated perhaps a third of the way through the ruins when Alara suddenly gripped Kalen's arm, stopping him mid-step. Her skin patterns flashed urgent blue beneath her protective clothing. "Machines," she whispered. "Many. Coming." Seconds later, Kalen's own sensors confirmed her warning. Multiple signals approaching from the northeast, at least 5 drones, moving in formation. Their path would intercept Kalen and Alara in minutes. Down, Kalen urged, pulling Alara into the shelter of a collapsed wall. Stay absolutely still. They pressed themselves into the shadows as the hum of drone engines grew louder. Through a gap in the wreckage, Kalen caught glimpses of sleek black shapes cutting through the toxic haze. These weren't simple search drones like the one Alara had disabled. These were combat models, armed with stun weapons and capture capabilities. They're hurting, Kalen realized aloud. Searching in a grid pattern, driving anything they find toward. He stopped, scanning the area ahead of them. There, barely visible through the haze, about a kilometer away, was the silhouette of something much larger than a drone, a transport vessel, hovering above the ruins. Hunters, Alara whispered, fear evident in her voice. The drones moved closer, their sensors sweeping methodically across the wreckage. One passed directly overhead, its cameras rotating to scan the area around them. Kalen and Alara remained motionless, but their hiding place provided limited concealment from aerial viewpoints. The drone paused, its sensors focusing on their position. It emitted a sharp, pulsing signal, an alert to the others. They found us, Kalen hissed. Run! They burst from cover as the drone descended, its capture mechanism extending. Kalen led them on a zigzagging path through the ruins, using the labyrinthine wreckage to break line of sight with their pursuers. The other drones converged rapidly, their formation tightening. Ahead, the transport vessel began to move, positioning itself to cut off possible escape routes. We can't outrun them, Kalen panted, pulling Alara behind the bulk of a toppled storage tank. And there's no place to hide that their sensors can't penetrate. Alara's breathing was labored, her eyes wide with fear and determination behind her mask. I can stop them, she said. Like before. All of them? Kalen asked, concern evident. The effort nearly collapsed you last time, and that was just one drone. No choice, she replied simply, before Kalen could protest. Further, Alara stepped from behind their cover into a relatively open area. She removed her gloves, exposing the luminescent patterns on her hands to the toxic air. The drones immediately locked onto her position, converging with mechanical precision. The transport vessel changed course, moving to support the capture. Alara raised both arms, her body trembling with effort as the patterns across her skin began to glow with increasing intensity. The air around her seemed to distort, rippling like heat waves, but with an electric blue tinge. The lead drone faltered first, its systems disrupting as it entered the field of energy Alara was generating. It spun erratically before dropping to the ground. The others continued their approach, adjusting their flight patterns to compensate. Sweat beaded on Alara's forehead, soaking through the protective mask. The patterns on her skin pulsed faster, brighter, as she extended her influence outward. 2 more drones crashed, but the remaining pair adapted, shifting to frequencies that seemed resistant to her disruption. Alara, it's too much, Kalen called, seeing her legs buckle slightly. She didn't respond, her focus absolute as she pushed her abilities further. Blood trickled from her nose as the energy field expanded. The remaining drones' systems flickered, but they continued their approach, now only meters away. In desperation, Kalen grabbed a length of metal debris and hurled it at the nearest drone, temporarily disrupting its flight path. The moment's confusion was enough. Alara's energy pulse surged, catching both remaining drones in its peak intensity. Their systems overloaded simultaneously, sending them crashing into the toxic soil. But the transport vessel remained, now descending rapidly toward their position. Alara staggered, her energy field collapsing as exhaustion overcame her. She would have fallen if Kalen hadn't caught her, supporting her weight against him. Can't. More, she gasped, her skin patterns fading to dull gray. You've done enough, Kalen assured her, scanning desperately for an escape route as the transport lowered to hovering position 30 meters away. Its side panel slid open, revealing armed figures in environmental suits, human mercenaries rather than drones, immune to Alera's technological disruption. Behind the processing tower, Kalen decided, half carrying Alera toward the skeletal remains of what had once been a chemical refinement facility. There's a maintenance tunnel network underneath. If we can reach it. They stumbled forward as weapons fire erupted behind them, projectiles designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Omnicorp wanted their asset recovered intact. Caustic dust kicked up around their feet as the shots impacted nearby. Alera struggled to maintain consciousness, forcing her legs to cooperate as they reached the tower's base. Kalen located the access hatch he'd been hoping for, emergency access to the underground maintenance level. The hatch was sealed by years of corrosion. Kalen attacked it with a pry bar from his pack, leveraging his weight against the resistant metal. Behind them, the mercenaries advanced methodically, their weapons raised. With a grinding shriek, the hatch finally gave way. Kalen helped Alera through the opening, then followed, pulling the hatch closed behind them just as weapons fire peppered its surface. They found themselves in a narrow maintenance tunnel, dimly lit by emergency strips that had somehow maintained power after all these years. The air was stale, but less toxic than above ground. The tunnels had been designed with their own filtration systems for worker safety. "Can you walk?" Kalen asked, supporting Alera's weight. She nodded weakly, though her skin remained an alarming gray color. "Which way?" she managed. Kalen oriented himself using the structural layout he remembered from his time working for Omnicorp. The tunnels extend for kilometers in all directions. They'll try to follow us, but we have a head start, and I know these systems better than they do. They moved as quickly as Alera's condition allowed, navigating through the labyrinthine underground complex. Kalen chose their path carefully, avoiding main junctions where pursuers would expect them to go, instead using service crawlways and emergency bypasses. After what seemed like hours of tense progress, they paused in a small maintenance hub to rest. Kalen checked Alera's vital signs with concern. Her pulse was weak, but stable, her breathing shallow. "You push yourself too far," he said, offering water from their dwindling supply. "Had to," she replied simply, drinking sparingly. Some color had returned to her skin patterns, shifting from gray to a pale silver, an improvement, but nowhere near her normal luminescence. "We should be safe here for a short while," Kalen told her, checking their location against his mental map. "The outpost is still about 15 kilometers away, but these tunnels might get us at least part of the distance." Alera nodded tiredly, then suddenly tensed. Her head tilted in the now familiar gesture of sensing something beyond human perception. "What is it?" Kalen asked, instantly alert. "Others," Alera whispered, but her expression wasn't one of fear. "Not hunters. Different. Survivors." Kalen asked, hardly daring to hope. Alera shook her head slightly. "Don't know, but different energy. Not like machines." Kalen considered their options. If there were other people in the tunnels, they could be fellow exiles, scavengers, or even Omnicorp deserters, potentially allies, but just as likely threats. "Can you tell which direction?" he asked. Alera pointed down one of the connecting passages, not directly toward their pursuers, but not toward their intended destination either. "We'll proceed carefully," Kalen decided. "Stay behind me, and if I signal you to stop or hide, do it immediately." They advanced slowly through the dimly lit passage, Kalen leading with his salvage scanner held before them. The tunnel gradually widened, showing signs of more frequent use. Less dust on the floor, makeshift repairs to damaged sections, even the occasional marking scratched into the wall. After several hundred meters, the tunnel opened into what had once been a large storage area. Makeshift barriers have been constructed at strategic points, creating a defensible space. Dim light sources, powered by jury-rigged generators, cast long shadows across the chamber. "Stop right there," commanded a voice from behind one of the barriers. Kalen froze, placing himself protectively in front of Alera. "We're not hostile," he called back. "We're just passing through, trying to reach the southern outpost." There was a pause, then the sound of hushed consultation. Finally, three figures emerged from behind the barricade. They wore mismatched environmental gear, clearly salvaged and repaired multiple times. Their faces were partially obscured by breathing apparatus, but their stance was cautious rather than aggressive. "You're heading to Haven?" asked the lead figure, a woman with streaks of gray in her dark hair. Her eyes widened as she noted Alara's alien features. "What in hell's name are you carrying with you?" "Not what," Kalen corrected firmly. "Who?" "And she saved both our lives up there. We're being hunted by Omnicorp recovery teams." At the mention of Omnicorp, the three survivors exchanged meaningful glances. The woman gestured to her companions, who lowered their improvised weapons slightly. "I'm Saren," she introduced herself, "former environmental scientist. These are Malik and Juno. We're part of what's left of the Xylos underground." "The Resistance Network," Kalen breathed. "It's still active?" "Barely," Saren admitted. "Most were killed or evacuated years ago. We're one of the last cells still operating." "And you are?" "Kalen, former Omnicorp engineer." "This is Alara." He hesitated, then added, "She was being transported in a containment pod when the disaster happened. Omnicorp's been experimenting on her people. They're not happy she escaped." Saren approached cautiously, studying Alara with the analytical gaze of a scientist rather than the fear or revulsion Kalen had half expected. "Remarkable," she murmured. "The bioluminescent patterns, they're not decorative, are they? They serve a function." Alara, still weak but more alert now, met the woman's gaze steadily. "Energy control," she explained simply. "She can disrupt electronic systems," Kalen elaborated. "She disabled multiple combat drones before we had to flee into the tunnels." This information clearly interested Saren. "We've been fighting those damn machines for years with limited success." She turned to her companions. "Malik, check the north sensors. If Omnicorp is hunting in force up there, we need to know." The man nodded and moved to a console at the edge of the chamber. Saren gestured for Kalen and Alara to follow her deeper into the survivors' makeshift base. "You both need medical attention," she observed. "Especially your friend. Our supplies are limited, but we can help with the basics." The rebel encampment was larger than it first appeared, extending through several interconnected storage chambers. Perhaps 20 people moved about the space, all wearing the same hodgepodge of salvaged equipment. Some worked at repair stations, others monitored rudimentary surveillance systems, while a few tended to hydroponic gardens that provided fresh food, a luxury Kalen hadn't experienced in years. In a small area designated as their medical facility, a middle-aged man with a prosthetic arm examined Alara, while Kalen explained their situation more fully to Saren. "We've suspected for years that Omnicorp was conducting non-human research," Saren said grimly when he'd finished. "We intercepted fragmented communications, found strange equipment in abandoned labs. But this," she glanced at Alara, "this confirms everything. The outpost we were heading for, Haven, you called it, is it still operational?" Kalen asked. "It's our main settlement now," Saren confirmed. "About 50 people, better facilities than we have here, more sustainable. We mainly use this forward base for reconnaissance and salvage operations." Malik returned, his expression tense beneath his breathing apparatus. "Multiple signals on the surface," he reported. "Combat drones, transport vehicles, and something big, probably command ship. They're establishing a search grid centered on where our guests must have entered the tunnels." "They're not giving up," Kalen said grimly. "They never do. When it comes to their proprietary assets," Saren replied with evident disgust. "But neither do we. We've been evading them for 15 years. She turned to the medic. "Dr. Marshall, what's her condition?" The doctor straightened from his examination of Alara. "Remarkable physiology," he said. "Evidence of extensive surgical trauma that's healing at an accelerated rate. Current condition appears to be severe energy depletion rather than physical injury. I'd recommend rest, nutrient replenishment, and monitoring." "Will she be stable enough to move soon?" Saren asked. "I don't like our chances if we stay here with that level of Omnicorp activity above us." "Give her 6 hours minimum," Dr. Marshall advised. "Then reassess." Saren nodded. "We'll prepare for evacuation to Haven. Malik, start the protocols." Juno, organize our most essential equipment for transport. She turned back to Kalen. You should rest too. We have a small sleeping area through there. I'll wake you if anything changes. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed Kalen. The adrenaline that had carried him through their flight was ebbing, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. Still, he hesitated, glancing at Alara. Go, she told him, her voice stronger than before. I am safe here. The confidence in her assessment, after weeks of constant wariness, convinced him. Kalen nodded and allowed himself to be guided to the sleeping quarters. Little more than cleared spaces with salvaged bedding, but safer than anywhere he'd slept in years. He was awakened what felt like minutes later by Saren shaking his shoulder urgently. They found the northern entrance, she said without preamble. We need to move immediately. Kalen was instantly alert, gathering his few possessions. Alara, already being prepared for transport. Dr. Marshall says she's recovered enough for the journey, if we're careful. The evacuation was clearly a well-rehearsed procedure. Within minutes, the essential equipment had been packed, surveillance systems disabled, and all evidence of long-term occupation removed or disguised. Alara was supported between Kalen and Juno, still weak but able to walk. We'll take the maintenance shafts to the Southern Transit Hub, Saren explained as they moved out. From there, we can access the emergency vehicle tunnels that lead to Haven. 6 hours of hard travel if we're lucky and uninterrupted. Their group moved swiftly through the narrower maintenance corridors, away from the main tunnels where Omnicorp forces would concentrate their search. The journey was arduous, climbing through vertical shafts, crawling through ventilation ducts, navigating flooded sections where toxic chemicals had seeped in from above. Alara struggled at times, her strength not fully recovered, but she never complained. When they paused briefly for rest and water, she gripped Kalen's hand. Thank you, she said softly, for finding me, for everything. We're not safe yet, he reminded her. She nodded, but not alone anymore. Both of us found others. The simple observation struck Kalen deeply. For years, he'd survived in isolation, convinced that humanity had nothing left to offer him after Omnicorp's betrayal. Now, surrounded by people who had also refused to surrender to corporate power, he felt something he hadn't experienced since before the disaster, a sense of common purpose, a belonging. Their moment was interrupted by Malik rushing back from his position as scout. Movement ahead, he reported tensely. Mechanical signatures in the main junction. They've predicted our route, Saren realized, checking her map. We'll need to divert through the processing levels. Those were heavily damaged in the disaster, Kalen warned. Structural integrity might be compromised. We don't have a choice, Saren replied grimly. It's either risk the processing levels or face combat drones in the main junction. They altered course, descending to a lower level where the air grew noticeably more caustic. Their masks' filters labored to keep up with the increased concentration of chemicals. The processing level had once housed massive vats of industrial compounds used in Omnicorp's extraction processes. Now those vats were cracked and leaking, their contents forming. Toxic pools that had to be carefully circumvented. Movement behind us, Juno warned from her position at the rear. They're tracking our heat signatures. We're still 2 kilometers from the vehicle tunnels, Saren said, frustration evident in her voice. We need to buy time. Alara straightened, determination in her violet eyes. I can help. You're not fully recovered, Kalen protested. Enough to disrupt their tracking, she insisted. Don't need full power. Before anyone could object further, Alara placed her palm against a nearby control panel. The patterns on her skin brightened, though not with the intense glow Kalen had witnessed earlier. A subtle pulse of energy transferred from her hand into the facility's ancient systems. The environmental controls for the entire level suddenly activated, vents opening and emergency purge systems engaging. Clouds of caustic vapor filled the corridors behind them, obscuring thermal signatures and creating a barrier of toxic gas. That will slow them, Alara said with satisfaction, though the effort had clearly cost her. She leaned more heavily on Kalen's support. Impressive improvisation, Saren acknowledged. Let's make it count. They pushed forward with renewed urgency, eventually reaching a massive circular door that sealed off the vehicle tunnels. Once used for transporting heavy equipment and materials, these tunnels have been designed to withstand even the most catastrophic industrial accidents, which had inadvertently preserved them through the disaster. Saren entered a complex sequence into the security panel. With a hydraulic groan, the massive door began to slide open. We maintain this access point carefully, she explained as they passed through. It's our lifeline to Haven. Beyond the door lay a wide, relatively intact tunnel. Several vehicles sat in various states of repair, older models that had been abandoned during the evacuation and subsequently salvaged by the resistance. Malik, is the rover operational? Saren asked. Fueled and ready, he confirmed, leading them to a six-wheeled transport vehicle with reinforced environmental shielding. It'll be tight with all of us, but it'll get us to Haven. They loaded their essential equipment and crowded inside the vehicle. Malik took the controls, powering up the rover's electric engines. The vehicle hummed to life, its headlights illuminating the long tunnel ahead. Just as they began to move forward, a thunderous explosion shook the chamber behind them. The circular door they'd passed through buckled inward, frame distorting from the force of the blast. Drive, Saren commanded. Maximum speed. The rover surged forward as combat drones poured through the damaged doorway behind them. Weapons fire peppered the rear of the vehicle, most deflecting off the reinforced plating, but a few finding vulnerable points. One shot penetrated the cabin, narrowly missing Juno before embedding itself in the control panel. Sparks erupted from the damaged electronics. We're losing power to the rear stabilizers, Malik reported grimly, fighting to maintain control of the increasingly unstable vehicle. And they're gaining on us. Through the rear viewport, Kalen could see the drones forming a pursuit formation, their weapons charging for another volley. Behind them, a larger transport was now visible, likely carrying human operatives. Alara, wedged between Kalen and the doctor, suddenly gripped the metal floor of the rover. Her skin patterns began to glow once more. Alara, don't, Kalen urged. You'll deplete yourself completely. No choice. She repeated her earlier sentiment. Help me. To the back. Need to be closer. Understanding her intent, Kalen helped Alara move to the rear of the cabin, where a small viewport provided visual access to their pursuers. Dr. Marshall tried to intervene, but Saren held him back. Let her try, the resistance leader said. We're out of options. Alara pressed both hands against the metal hull, her forehead touching the cold surface between them. The patterns across her skin brightened to almost painful intensity, the glow extending beyond her body to suffuse the rear section of the rover itself. The pursuing drones faltered, their formation breaking as electronic disruption swept through their systems. Two collided with the tunnel walls, exploding in showers of sparks. A third spun erratically before crashing into the transport vehicle behind it. The remaining pursuers fell back, maintaining distance from the range of Alara's disruption field. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it bought them precious time and distance. Alara collapsed, unresponsive. Blood trickled from her nose and ears, her skin patterns fading to an alarming dull gray. Dr. Marshall was at her side instantly, checking vital signs. She's alive, he reported, but barely. Severe system shock. We need to get her to proper medical facilities immediately. Haven's medical bay is as good as anywhere left on Xylos, Saren assured him. Malik ETA? 20 minutes if the rover holds together, he replied, hands steady on the controls despite the damage. The tunnel appears clear ahead. Kalen cradled Alara's unconscious form, a storm of emotions churning within him. In the space of weeks, this strange being from another world had transformed from a helpless victim to someone who had repeatedly risked her life to save not only him, but complete strangers. Her courage shamed his years of isolated survival. Stay with me, he whispered to her. We're almost there, almost to safety. The rover limped its way through the remainder of the tunnel, its systems deteriorating but still functioning well enough to maintain forward momentum. Finally, the passage widened into a massive underground chamber that had once served as a maintenance depot for Omnicorp's heavy equipment. Now it housed Haven, the Resistance's primary settlement. Repurposed industrial structures formed living quarters. Gardens utilized artificial lighting to grow food, and a small but functional medical facility occupied what had once been administrative offices. As the damaged rover rolled to a stop, people rushed forward to help unload. Dr. Marshall immediately coordinated Alara's transfer to the medical bay, barking orders to his colleagues about specialized equipment they would need. Kalen followed, refusing to leave Alara's side. The medical bay was surprisingly well equipped. Salvaged Omnicorp medical technology combined with ingenious adaptations created by the Resistance over years of necessity. We need to stabilize her unique biology, Dr. Marshall explained as they connected monitoring equipment. Her physiology shows evidence of a symbiotic relationship with the energy she manipulates. The overuse has created a dangerous imbalance. Kalen watched anxiously as the medical team worked. Through the windows of the medical bay, he could see the broader community of Haven, perhaps 50 people of different ages, all survivors who had adapted to life on a planet that Omnicorp had deemed uninhabitable after exploiting it to ruin. Saren joined him after ensuring the rest of their group was settled. "Your friend saved all our lives," she said quietly. "That kind of sacrifice doesn't go unnoticed here." "She's been through so much," Kalen replied. "Captured, experimented on, abandoned, then hunted. Yet she still risked everything for people she just met. Sometimes those who have suffered the most understand best the value of compassion," Saren observed. "Dr. Marshall is the best we have. If anyone can help her, he can." Hours passed as the medical team worked to stabilize Alara. Kalen refused all suggestions that he rest, maintaining his vigil outside the treatment room. Finally, Dr. Marshall emerged, exhaustion evident in his face but satisfaction in his eyes. "She's stabilizing," he reported. "Her natural healing abilities are remarkable once we provided the right support. The patterns on her skin are regaining color, which I believe is a positive sign." "Can I see her?" Kalen asked immediately. The doctor nodded. Briefly. "She's conscious but very weak." Alara lay on a medical bed, connected to various monitoring devices. Her skin patterns pulsed with a faint but steady silver glow, much improved from the alarming gray of earlier. Her violet eyes found Kalen as he entered, and a small smile touched her lips. "We made it," she said softly. "Thanks to you," he replied, taking her hand gently. "How do you feel?" "Empty still," she admitted, "but filling again." Slowly, she glanced around at the medical bay. "This place, Haven, it feels almost peaceful." "It is," Kalen assured her. "We're safe here, at least for now, and you're not alone anymore." "None of us are." Alara's hand tightened weakly around his. "What will happen after I heal?" It was a question Kalen hadn't allowed himself to consider during their desperate flight. The future had been a luxury too distant to contemplate. Now, surrounded by a community that had survived against all odds, possibilities began to take shape. "That's up to you," he told her. "The people here could use your abilities, your knowledge. Or we could try to find a way off Xylos. Look for others of your kind who might have escaped elsewhere." "Don't know if others survived," Alara said, sadness briefly clouding her features. "But here, people fight against those who hurt me, those who hurt this world." Her determination returned. "I want to help." "Then we'll stay," Kalen decided. "We'll become part of this place. Help them build something better from what Omnicorp destroyed." Over the following days, as Alara gradually recovered her strength, Kalen integrated into Haven's community. His engineering skills were valuable for maintaining the settlement's critical systems, while his knowledge of Omnicorp operations provided strategic advantages. Alara, once well enough to leave the medical bay, became an object of curiosity but quickly earned respect through her quiet dignity and willingness to contribute. Under Dr. Marshall's supervision, she began exploring her abilities in controlled settings, learning to use them more efficiently without risking dangerous depletion. 2 weeks after their arrival, Saren called a community gathering in Haven's central chamber. The entire population assembled, with Kalen and Alara seated near the front. Omnicorp has increased its presence on Xylos significantly, Saren announced without preamble. Our reconnaissance indicates they've established a new facility in the northern ruins and brought in additional forces. They're searching methodically, sector by sector. Murmurs of concern spread through the gathering. Saren raised a hand for silence. We've survived their searches before, she reminded everyone. But this time, they're not just looking for resources or eliminating evidence of their past crimes. They're seeking something specific. All eyes turned to Alara, who met their gazes steadily. They want to weaponize her abilities, Saren continued. And based on what we've seen, those abilities could tip the balance of power not just here on Xylos, but throughout corporate-controlled space. So we hide better, someone suggested from the crowd. Move deeper, as we've done before. Saren shook her head. Running and hiding has kept us alive, but at what cost? We've been surviving, not living, not changing anything. She straightened, a new resolve in her bearing. I believe it's time to consider a more active resistance. This statement caused an even stronger reaction, with voices raised both in support and concern. Through the commotion, Alara rose slowly to her feet. Though still recovering, she stood straighter than Kalen had yet seen her, the patterns on her skin glowing with steady purpose. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly hushed chamber. Saren nodded, gesturing for her to continue. "Your world," Alara began, her English more fluid after weeks of practice, "was beautiful once before Omnicorp came. My world was beautiful too." Her voice faltered slightly, but she pressed on. Both destroyed by the same greed, the same disregard for life that isn't their own. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of various community members. "I have seen what running does. It keeps you alive, but is that enough? To just survive while they continue to destroy?" Her hand rose to touch the fading surgical scars on her neck. "They took everything from me. My world, my people, my freedom, my dignity. They try to take my spirit too, to make me a thing instead of a person." Her violet eyes flashed with unexpected intensity. "But they failed, and they will fail here too, if we stand together." The silence that followed her words was profound. Then, one by one, people began to nod in agreement. Some stepped forward to share their own stories of loss and defiance. The mood shifted from uncertainty to resolve. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked an older man who had been introduced to Kalen as their chief engineer. Saren exchanged glances with Alara before answering. "Omnicorp's new facility contains data we need, schematics of their operations throughout this system, communication protocols, evidence of their illegal activities. If we can access it, we could transmit that information to resistance cells on other worlds. We've never attempted a direct infiltration before," Malik pointed out. "Our survival has depended on staying hidden. And yet they keep finding us anyway," Juno countered. "Maybe it's time to change tactics." The discussion continued, with various perspectives voiced. Kalen listened, impressed by the democratic process this community had established in the aftermath of corporate tyranny. When asked, he shared his knowledge of Omnicorp facility designs and security protocols, information that had once gotten him branded a traitor but now served a greater purpose. By the end of the gathering, a plan had taken shape. A small team would attempt to infiltrate the new facility, with Alara's unique abilities providing an essential advantage against electronic security systems. Kalen, with his engineering knowledge, would accompany them. As the meeting dispersed, Dr. Marshall approached Alara with evident concern. "You're not fully recovered," he reminded her. "Using your abilities at the level this mission would require could cause permanent damage." "I understand the risk," she replied simply. Later, in the small quarters they'd been assigned, Kalen voiced his own concerns. "You don't have to do this. No one would think less of you for choosing not to risk yourself again." Alara sat cross-legged on her bed, her skin patterns shifting thoughtfully in the dim light. "When you found me in that cage," she said slowly, "I had nothing left. No hope, no future." Just tears for a world and people I would never see again. She looked up at him, her violet eyes clear and determined. You gave me back my life, Kalen. Now I choose what to do with it. Her certainty silenced his objections. In the weeks since her rescue, Alara had transformed from a broken victim into someone with purpose and agency. Who was he to deny her the right to make her own choices, even dangerous ones? The mission was planned for 3 days later, allowing time for final preparations and for Alara to continue regaining her strength. The team would be small, Saren leading, with Kalen, Alara, Malik, and 2 others with combat experience. On the eve of their departure, a rare occurrence brightened Haven. The atmospheric scrubbers that the community had painstakingly built over years had created a small pocket of cleaner air in the vast cavern. For the first time in Alara's experience on Xylos, she could remove her breathing apparatus within the settlement's central area and breathe relatively unfiltered air. The community gathered to share a meal together, a gesture of solidarity before the dangerous mission ahead. Kalen watched as Alara interacted with the people of Haven, no longer seen as an alien curiosity, but as a valued member of their society. Children approached her fearlessly, fascinated by the luminescent patterns on her skin. She showed them how she could make them pulse in harmless, playful displays. She belongs here, Saren observed, joining Kalen at the edge of the gathering. More than she realizes, perhaps more than any of us. There's something symbolic about her presence, a reminder that we're fighting not just for ourselves, but for something larger. You sound like you've been waiting for someone like her, Kalen noted. Saren smiled faintly. Perhaps I have. Revolutions need symbols, Kalen. They need hope embodied in something, or someone, that represents what could be rather than what is. She nodded toward Alara, a being from another world, tortured by the same corporate power that destroyed our planet, now standing with us to fight back. If that's not a powerful symbol, I don't know what is. Kalen understood the truth in Saren's words, but felt a protective instinct rise within him. She's not just a symbol. She's a person who's suffered enough. Of course she is, Saren agreed. And it's her choice to be here, to fight with us. That's what makes it meaningful. She clapped him on the shoulder before moving away. Get some rest. Tomorrow will test all of us. The journey to OmniCorp's new facility began before Haven's artificial dawn. The team traveled in 2 vehicles, reinforced rovers that had been prepared with additional electromagnetic shielding based on Alara's recommendations to help mask their approach from sensors. They took the least direct route, avoiding known patrol zones and utilizing the most severely contaminated areas where even OmniCorp's drones rarely ventured. Kalen drove the lead vehicle with Alara beside him, monitoring the scanner she had helped modify to detect electronic surveillance. How are you feeling? He asked during a quiet stretch of their journey. Alara's skin patterns rippled with calm confidence, a marked contrast to the terrified girl he'd found in the containment pod. Strong, she replied. Ready. As they approached the facility's outer perimeter, they abandoned the vehicles in the shelter of a collapsed processing plant and continued on foot. The facility itself was a stark contrast to the surrounding ruins. New construction rising from the wasteland, its surfaces gleaming with protective coatings designed to withstand Xylos's caustic atmosphere. Standard OmniCorp security layout, Kalen observed as they surveyed it from cover. 3-tier system, outer perimeter sensors, midfield response units, inner facility lockdown protocols. Can you disable them? Malik asked. Kalen shook his head. Not remotely, and not without triggering alerts. But he glanced at Alara. She nodded in understanding. I could disrupt the outer sensors. Create a blind spot, but not for long without being detected. How long? Saren asked. Perhaps 5 minutes before the system recognizes the pattern of failure and triggers an alert, Kalen estimated. Then we move fast, Saren decided. Alara creates our opening, we get inside, and she recovers while we locate the central data hub. The plan was set in motion as darkness fell. Alara positioned herself where she could focus on a specific section of the perimeter security system. Her skin patterns brightened as she concentrated, directing her energy with more precision than Kalen had yet witnessed. Now, she whispered after nearly a minute of intense focus. The team moved swiftly across the exposed ground between their cover and the facility's outer wall. Kalen kept a supporting hand on Alara's arm as she maintained the disruption field while moving. A feat she had practiced but never attempted under such pressure. They reached the access point Kalen had identified, a maintenance hatch designed for servicing the external air filtration systems. While Saren and Malik secured their position, Kalen worked quickly to override the hatch's security. 30 seconds, Alara warned, strain evident in her voice. The lock disengaged just as she spoke. They slipped inside, closing the hatch behind them. Alara sagged against the wall, her energy temporarily depleted from the sustained effort. Take a moment, Kalen told her, supporting her weight. You did perfectly. The interior service corridor was deserted, as expected during the facility's night cycle, when minimal staff would be present. Saren consulted the schematic Kalen had helped construct based on standard OmniCorp designs. The data center should be 2 levels down, central section, she whispered. Malik, take point. Kalen, stay with Alara until she's recovered enough to move safely. They proceeded cautiously through the facility, utilizing service passages where possible to avoid security cameras. Once, they were forced to hide as a security patrol passed, but otherwise met no resistance. The data center's entrance was exactly where Kalen had predicted, a reinforced door with both electronic and physical security measures. This would be the most challenging obstacle. Multiple systems, Kalen murmured as he examined the security panel. Biometric, keycard, and code verification. We can't bypass all 3 conventionally. All eyes turned to Alara, who had regained some of her strength during their cautious advance. She studied the panel, then placed her hand near it without touching the surface. Complex, she said softly, but I can feel the patterns of energy, similar to the cage you found me in. Her skin patterns intensified as she focused her abilities. Rather than the broad disruption she had used against the drones, this was precise manipulation, following the electronic pathways within the security system, redirecting energy flows, creating false positive responses in the verification protocols. Sweat beaded on her forehead with the effort, but she maintained the intricate manipulation until the security panel flashed green and the heavy door began to slide open. Quickly, she gasped. Cannot hold it long. They slipped inside the data center, a large room filled with servers and monitoring stations. The facility's central database would be accessible from here, containing everything the Resistance needed to expose OmniCorp's continued illegal operations. Guard the door, Saren ordered 2 of their team, while she and Malik moved to the main console. Kalen, we need your access knowledge. Working rapidly, Kalen navigated through the security layers of the OmniCorp system. His former credentials had long been revoked, but he knew the architecture intimately. The back doors, the administrative overrides, the hierarchical design that prioritized data protection over system integrity. Alara stood nearby, recovered enough to maintain a subtle disruption field that masked their digital footprint within the system. Without her abilities, alarms would have triggered within seconds of their unauthorized access. I'm in, Kalen announced after tense minutes of work. Downloading everything to our secure drives now. As the data transfer began, Alara suddenly stiffened. Her head tilted in the familiar gesture of sensing something beyond normal perception. Someone's coming, she warned. Multiple people, armed. How long on that download? Saren demanded. 3 minutes minimum, Kalen replied, fingers flying across the console to prioritize the most crucial data. We don't have 3 minutes, Malik said grimly, checking the small surveillance monitor near the door. Security team approaching from both directions. They were trapped. The data center had only one entrance, now blocked by approaching guards. Even if they completed the download, escape seemed impossible. Alara stepped forward, her expression resolute. I can create a diversion. Something larger than before. It could kill you, Kalen protested, remembering her condition after disrupting the drones during their escape. Not if I'm careful, she countered. Not if I focus correctly. She looked at Saren. Get the data. It's worth the risk. Before anyone could object further, Alara moved to the center of the room. She knelt, placing both palms flat against the floor. Her skin patterns began to glow with increasing intensity, pulsing in complex sequences as she connected with the facility's power systems through the conductive flooring. "Be ready to move," she instructed as her concentration deepened. The energy emanating from Alara spread outward in concentric waves, visible only as subtle distortions in the air. Unlike her previous uses of her abilities, this was not chaotic disruption, but precise manipulation, targeting specific systems throughout the facility in sequence. The lights flickered, then stabilized at half brightness. Across the facility, alarms began to sound, but not for the data center. Instead, they indicated environmental breaches and containment failures in distant sections. The security teams outside their door received urgent redirections to these false emergencies. System-wide cascade, Kalen realized, watching diagnostics flash across the nearby monitors. She's creating ghost failures across the entire facility. "Download complete," Malik announced, removing the data drive from the console. "Now we leave," Saren decided. "Alara, can you walk?" Alara nodded, though the effort of maintaining such a complex disruption was evident in her strained expression. Her hands trembled slightly as she rose from her kneeling position, but her skin patterns maintained their intense glow. "Different route," she instructed, pointing toward the back of the data center. "Maintenance shaft. Novatus." Following her guidance, they discovered an access panel disguised as part of the wall, an emergency evacuation route for technicians in case of system catastrophe, exactly as OmniCore facility regulations required, but rarely featured on official schematics. They moved swiftly through the narrow passage, emerging 2 levels up near the facility's environmental control center. The chaos Alara had created provided perfect cover. Security personnel rushed past them, responding to phantom emergencies throughout the complex. "The roof landing pad," Saren decided, consulting their exit options. "There should be transport vehicles we can appropriate." They made their way upward, encountering minimal resistance from the disorganized security forces. Alara maintained enough of her energy field to disrupt surveillance systems in their immediate vicinity, though Kalen could see her strength waning with each passing minute. The rooftop landing pad was exactly as Saren had predicted. A small shuttle sat ready for emergency departures, its systems on standby. Malik moved immediately to the controls, activating the engines while the others secured the perimeter. "Company coming," warned one of their team members, pointing to a security detail emerging onto the rooftop from another access point. Weapons fire erupted as they raced for the shuttle. Alara stumbled, nearly falling before Kalen caught her arm. Her skin patterns fluctuated wildly with exhaustion. "Almost there," he encouraged, half carrying her the final distance. They tumbled into the shuttle as Malik engaged the thrusters, lifting the vehicle from the pad just as security forces converged on their position. But they weren't clear yet. Warning indicators flashed across the shuttle's console as the facility's automated defense systems locked onto them. "Surface-to-air weapons activating," Malik reported tensely. "We can't outrun them all." Alara collapsed against Kalen in the rear of the shuttle, raised her head with determination. "One more time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Alara, no," Kalen protested. "You've done enough." She smiled faintly, her violet eyes meeting his. "Trust me," she said. "I understand. My limits now." With visible effort, she pressed her palm against the shuttle's metal flooring. Rather than the intense glow of previous efforts, her skin patterns pulsed in a subtle, rhythmic sequence, like a heartbeat, steady and controlled. The shuttle's electronic systems hummed in response, synchronizing with her energy pattern. "What's happening?" Saren asked, watching in amazement as the facility's targeting systems suddenly lost their lock, sensors unable to distinguish the shuttle from the surrounding atmosphere. "She's making us invisible to their systems," Kalen realized. "Not disrupting them, harmonizing with them." Alara maintained the delicate energy balance as Malik piloted them away from the facility, gaining distance with each second. Only when they were well beyond weapons range did she release her connection, slumping against Kalen in exhaustion. But unlike previous uses of her abilities, she remained conscious, her skin patterns tired but still maintaining a healthy silver glow. She had finally learned to use her gift without depleting herself completely, a breakthrough born of necessity and growing mastery. "We did it," she murmured, allowing herself a small smile of satisfaction. The journey back to Haven was tense but uninterrupted. Omnicorp's search vessels appeared in the distance several times, but with Alara's guidance, they remained undetected. By the time they reached the concealed entrance to the underground settlement, dawn was breaking over Xylos's toxic landscape. Their return was met with celebration. The data they had retrieved was more comprehensive than they had dared hope. Detailed records of Omnicorp's continuing illegal operations, not just on Xylos, but throughout the system, evidence of corporate crimes that would be impossible to ignore if properly disseminated. With this, we can reach out to resistance cells on other worlds, Saren explained to the gathered community. Build a coordinated response to Omnicorp's expansion. For the first time, we have a chance not just to survive, but to push back. In the days that followed, Haven hummed with renewed purpose. The communications team worked tirelessly to establish secure connections with other resistance groups. The engineering team improved their defenses in anticipation of increased Omnicorp attention. The medical team, with Alara's assistance, developed new treatments for exposure to Xylos's toxic environment. "You found your place here," Kalen observed one evening as he and Alara stood in Haven's central garden area, watching the community bustling around them. Alara nodded, contentment evident in her expression and in the calm, steady glow of her skin patterns. "Not just a place," she corrected gently. "A purpose." Her recovery since the mission had been remarkable. Dr. Marshall's examinations confirmed what they had begun to suspect. Her physiology was adapting to Xylos, growing stronger through each challenge rather than being diminished by them. The very abilities that Omnicorp had tried to weaponize were enabling her to thrive in an environment that should have been hostile to her. "You know," Kalen said thoughtfully, "when I found you in that containment pod, I thought I was saving you." He smiled. "Now I'm not sure who saved whom." Alara's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with a familiarity that had developed gradually over their weeks together. "Perhaps we saved each other," she suggested. Their moment of reflection was interrupted by Saren approaching with purposeful strides. "We've made contact with resistance cells on 3 other worlds," she reported. "They've all received the data and begun their own operations against Omnicorp holdings." "And the evidence of experimentation on Alara's people?" Kalen asked. "Being presented to the Interplanetary Regulatory Commission as we speak," Saren confirmed. "Omnicorp is facing simultaneous investigations on multiple fronts. They're scrambling to contain the damage. They will come for us," Alara predicted calmly, "with greater force than before." "Yes," Saren agreed without hesitation, "which is why we've been developing a contingency plan. The Council would like both of you to review it." The plan, as presented in the emergency session that followed, was both bold and desperate. Converting Haven from a hidden sanctuary to a defensible stronghold, using the data they had acquired to predict and counter Omnicorp tactics, and leveraging Alara's unique abilities to protect their most vulnerable systems. "This isn't just about survival anymore," Saren explained to the assembled community. "This is about reclaiming Xylos, about proving that even a world Omnicorp considered expendable can rise again." Some voiced concerns. The risks were enormous, the odds against them significant. But ultimately, the vote was unanimous. Haven would stand and fight rather than flee again. Preparations began immediately. Kalen found himself leading a team to reinforce Haven's structural defenses, while Alara worked with others to develop energy systems that could harness her abilities to protect larger areas without depleting her. "Do you think we can truly win against them?" Kalen asked Saren during a rare, quiet moment, 3 weeks into their preparations. "Define winning," she replied pragmatically. "Will we drive Omnicorp from Xylos completely? Probably not. But can we establish a free zone they can't control? Create a model for resistance that others can follow? Absolutely. Her confidence was infectious, spreading throughout Haven as the community transformed itself from survivors into defenders. Even the children participated, learning essential skills and taking pride in their contributions to the collective effort. The Omnicorp response, when it came, was initially subtle. Increased drone surveillance, signal jamming attempts, probing attacks on their outer defenses. Haven's new systems withstood these tests, giving them time to strengthen further. Then came the ultimatum, broadcast on all frequencies, impossible to ignore. Attention unauthorized inhabitants of Xylos, came the cold corporate voice. You are in possession of stolen Omnicorp property and classified information. Surrender the alien specimen and all data within 48 hours, or face immediate and decisive action. The message was accompanied by footage of a massive Omnicorp assault ship entering Xylos orbit, flanked by smaller tactical vessels. The threat was clear and credible. Haven's council convened immediately. Various options were debated, from diplomatic responses to preemptive strikes against known Omnicorp positions. Through it all, Alara sat quietly, listening to the discussions but not participating until directly addressed. "They want me," she finally said, her voice cutting through the increasingly heated debate. "That's what this is about. Not just the data, but me, what I represent, what they believe they can gain from me. We won't surrender you," Kalen stated firmly, echoed by nods around the table. "I know," Alara said with a small smile, "and I would not go. But perhaps we can use their fixation to our advantage." Her proposal was audacious, allowing Omnicorp to believe she was isolated and vulnerable at a location away from Haven, drawing their main force into an area where the Resistance held tactical advantages. Meanwhile, a smaller team would infiltrate the assault ship in orbit, using the distraction to upload the damning evidence directly into Omnicorp's own communication network, broadcasting it simultaneously to all their facilities and to regulatory authorities. "It's incredibly risky," Saren pointed out after Alara finished outlining her plan. "Especially for you. You be the bait." "Not alone," Alara clarified. "With a defense team, in a position of our choosing." And she hesitated, then continued with confidence. "I believe I can do more than just disrupt their technology. I've been practicing, learning, to demonstrate." She raised her hand. The patterns on her skin brightened, then seemed to expand beyond her physical form, creating a shimmering field of energy that enveloped her completely. Within this field, her form became indistinct, blending with the surrounding air until she was nearly invisible. "Optical camouflage," Kalen breathed in amazement. "You've learned to bend light." The field collapsed as Alara lowered her hand, fatigue, but not exhaustion showing in her expression. "Not just light. Sound, heat, electrical signals. I'm beginning to understand how my people's abilities were meant to work, not as weapons, but as harmonizers. We don't disrupt, we synchronize." The implications were significant. With this level of control, Alara could potentially protect an entire team from Omnicorp's detection systems. After lengthy deliberation, the Council approved a modified version of Alara's plan. The next 2 days were a flurry of preparation, positioning teams, establishing communication protocols, rehearsing coordinated actions. Kalen worked alongside Alara to prepare the location where she would allow herself to be detected, an abandoned research outpost in the northwestern quadrant, strategically positioned between toxic vents that would hinder Omnicorp's approach and provide the Resistance with natural cover. "You don't have to do this," he told her as they completed the final preparations. "There's still time to find another way." Alara paused in her work, turning to face him fully. The patterns on her skin rippled with calm determination. "When you found me in that cage," she said softly, "I had nothing. No clothes, no hope. Nothing but tears." She gestured around them, at the Resistance fighters preparing for battle, at the landscape they were fighting to reclaim. "Now I have everything worth fighting for. A purpose, a community." Her violet eyes met his with unwavering certainty. A future. Understanding the depth of her conviction, Kalen nodded. Then we fight together. The plan was set in motion as the Omnicorp ultimatum expired. Alara, along with a carefully selected defense team, including Kalen, positioned themselves at the research outpost. Simultaneously, the infiltration team led by Malik prepared to launch toward the assault ship in orbit, using a modified shuttle with enhanced stealth capabilities based on Alara's guidance. As expected, Omnicorp deployed a substantial force to the outpost once their sensors detected Alara's distinctive energy signature. Combat drones formed the first wave, followed by armored transport vehicles carrying human operatives. The battle was fierce but controlled. The resistance fighters used their knowledge of the terrain to devastating effect, neutralizing drones with precision shots and channeling the ground forces into prepared defensive positions. Alara remained at the heart of their defense, using her abilities to disrupt Omnicorp's coordination and communication. Meanwhile, the infiltration team successfully docked with the assault ship, using the distraction below to bypass security with minimal resistance. Once aboard, they moved quickly to the command center, where they could access the corporate-wide communication network. On the ground, the tide of battle shifted as Omnicorp deployed its final asset, a prototype combat exosuit, piloted by a human operator but augmented with technology clearly derived from studies of Alara's people. It moved with unnatural speed and projected energy fields similar to Alara's, but weaponized, cutting through the Resistance's defensive positions. This was their goal all along, Kalen realized as they fell back to a secondary position. They've been trying to replicate her abilities. Alara watched the approaching exosuit with a mixture of horror and resolve. A poor copy, she observed, using brute force instead of harmony, consuming energy instead of channeling it. The exosuit advanced relentlessly, its pilot protected behind layers of advanced armor and energy shielding. Conventional weapons barely slowed it. Soon it would reach their position where Alara waited. Fall back, she instructed the remaining defenders. Get to the extraction point. We're not leaving you, Kalen protested. You must, she insisted. This is my fight now. My responsibility. The conviction in her voice brooked no argument. The defenders reluctantly retreated to their fallback position, leaving Alara standing alone as the exosuit approached. Kalen remained hidden nearby, unwilling to abandon her completely despite her orders. The exosuit halted a dozen meters from Alara, its energy field crackling with aggressive power. The pilot's voice emerged from external speakers, distorted but recognizable as human. Specimen E7, the voice announced clinically. You've led us on quite a chase. But now you'll help us perfect what we've begun. Alara stood her ground, her posture relaxed despite the threat before her. You try to make a weapon from something you don't understand, she replied calmly. Life isn't meant to be weaponized. Energy isn't meant to be consumed. Philosophy from a laboratory specimen, the pilot mocked. How unexpected, but irrelevant. You're coming with us, conscious or not. The exosuit charged its primary weapon, a focused energy projector mounted on its right arm. But before it could fire, Alara made her move. Instead of disrupting the suit's systems as expected, she did something completely unexpected. She synchronized with them. The patterns across her skin brightened to an intense glow, matching the frequency of the exosuit's energy field precisely. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the suit's field began to fluctuate wildly as Alara established a resonance between her natural abilities and the artificial systems that had been derived from them. She wasn't fighting against the technology, she was communicating with it, reminding it of its origins. The pilot's confused shouts emerged from the speakers as the suit's systems began responding to Alara's influence rather than his commands. The weapon powered down, the aggressive stance relaxed, and the energy field transformed from a destructive barrier to a harmonious extension of Alara's own. What are you doing? The pilot demanded, panic evident in his voice as he lost control of the advanced system. Teaching, Alara replied simply, maintaining the connection, showing your technology what it was meant to be. With a final surge of energy, she completed the synchronization. The exosuit's systems reset completely, its artificial intelligence core rewriting protocols based on the true nature of the energy it had been designed to weaponize. The pilot was ejected as the suit reconfigured itself, landing unceremoniously in the toxic soil several meters away. The exosuit stood motionless for a moment, then knelt before Alara in a gesture almost like reverence. She approached it without fear, placing her hand on its armored chest. The connection between them was visible as rippling patterns of energy flowing between her skin and the suit's surface. "It recognizes you," Kalen said in wonder as he emerged from his hiding place. "It recognizes itself," Alara corrected. "What was derived from? The harmony instead of the weapon." Above them, a sudden flash illuminated the sky as the infiltration team completed their mission. The Omnicorp assault ship's communication array activated at full power, broadcasting the evidence of corporate crimes throughout the system. Simultaneously, the ship's offensive capabilities shut down. Malik's team had succeeded in their primary and secondary objectives. On the ground, the remaining Omnicorp forces received the broadcast along with everyone else. Confusion spread through their ranks as they witnessed irrefutable evidence of their employer's criminal activities, including the illegal experimentation on Alara's people and the environmental catastrophe on Xylos that had been deliberately concealed. Some laid down their weapons immediately. Others retreated in disarray. The mercenaries and security contractors Omnicorp relied upon began to question the orders they had been following so blindly. The battle wasn't won in a conventional sense. There was no absolute surrender, no white flag raised. Instead, the Resistance's victory came in the form of revelation. The truth, so long suppressed, now spread beyond containment. When the Resistance regrouped at Haven, the celebration was tempered with solemn recognition of what they had accomplished and what still lay ahead. Omnicorp would not simply disappear. Their power and influence remained substantial. But their hold on Xylos had been broken, and their crimes exposed. "What will you do with it?" Saren asked, gesturing toward the exosuit that had followed Alara back to Haven, now standing sentinel near the settlement's edge. "Repurpose it," Alara replied. "Like this world, turn what was meant for destruction into something that can heal." In the months that followed, that's exactly what happened. The exosuit, its systems fundamentally altered by Alara's influence, became a tool for environmental remediation. Under her guidance, it began processing the toxic compounds that had rendered Xylos uninhabitable, gradually restoring small areas to ecological health. The Resistance transformed as well, evolving from a hidden community of survivors into the foundation of a new society. Other Omnicorp workers and security personnel defected as the corporation's crimes became common knowledge, bringing valuable skills and information to Haven. Alara worked tirelessly during this time of transition. Her understanding of her own abilities grew daily, as did her connections with the technology derived from her people. She discovered that while she might be the last of her kind in this system, her cultural and biological heritage could live on through what she created and taught. 1 year after her rescue from the containment pod, Alara stood with Kalen on a ridge overlooking what had once been the Deadlands. Below them, a small valley showed the first signs of natural recovery, soil detoxified enough to support simple native plants, a small stream running clear rather than caustic. "It's just the beginning," she said, gesturing toward the green patch amid the surrounding wasteland. "But it proves what's possible." Kalen took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Their relationship had evolved gradually from rescuer and victim to equals, partners in the ongoing work of reclamation and rebuilding. "When I found you," he said quietly, "I thought I was saving a single life. I never imagined you would help save an entire world." Alara smiled, the luminescent patterns on her skin glowing with contentment and purpose. "Perhaps that's the greatest revenge against those who tried to reduce me to a weapon or a specimen, creating life where they brought only destruction." She looked toward Haven, visible in the distance as a community now partially above ground, no longer forced to hide completely beneath the surface. Children played in protected areas, people worked together on shared projects, and the first permanent structures rose as symbols of their determination to reclaim Xylos. "We all have our cages," she reflected. "Yours was isolation and mistrust. Mine was physical. Xylos itself was caged by corporate greed and environmental devastation." Her violet eyes met his with quiet conviction. But cages can be broken. Hope can be found even in the darkest places. As the sun set over the slowly healing landscape, casting an amber glow across the valley, Kalen and Alara stood together. Two unlikely survivors who had found each other and in their shared cause something neither had dared hope for when their paths first crossed. A future worth fighting for, a home worth building, and a love forged in the crucible of shared struggle. The toxic moons of Xylos still dominated the sky, but now they seemed less a reminder of what had been lost and more a challenge for what could yet be redeemed. In the face of that challenge, Alara no longer had tears of despair, but the quiet determination of someone who had moved beyond mere survival to truly living again.